Hey folks, thanks for watching Wood and Shop. We're here, my name's Elia Bizzarri, and we're here in my chair shop in Hillsborough, North Carolina. I'm a Windsor chair maker. And I just got finished filming this DVD with Joshua Farnsworth. It's on building this chair. And we just want to take a minute and talk about card scraper sharpening, because I think there's a few things that I have to impart. There's a lot of 1001 videos out there on sharpening a card scraper, and I like to do it in a way that doesn't involve any spare tools and is really fast and efficient, and you don't have to spend any extra money on it, and you get a sharp enough scraper that you can cut nice pretty shavings in a soft wood like pine. So let's get started here. So let me just talk about scrapers for a second. They come in a variety of different thicknesses. So this is a fairly thin one, and you can flex it really easily, and that's good for things like chair seats that you need to get into curves. There's sort of medium thickness ones that are not quite as flexible, and I have a number of those for doing things like arms and other flat surfaces. And there's really thick ones that I don't use much, so I can't really talk about. There's square ones. Oftentimes I'll take and grind the corners off of them so that they don't dig in, especially when I'm working on something like a chair seat, so that the corner doesn't get in the way or hurt my fingers. This is also useful for chairs and other curved objects. It's sort of got a flatter curve here and a more greatly curved edge over here, and you can take a normal scraper and grind it to match this. And then there's what's called French curves, which are like this, and you can have a whole wide range of curves on these, and they all come in different thicknesses. Saw blades work fine for them. There's, you can make your own out of old saw plates or whatever. So in order to have a sharp scraper, I'm going to talk about scraping them first, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use them, because they're both, there's misconceptions about both things. So a sharp scraper has a perfectly square edge here that is sharpened basically like a chisel. It needs to have just as much polish and be just as sharp. It can't have any sharpening burr left to have the most sharp scraper. Now, you can use scrapers that come straight off of a file, and they will scrape hardwoods and tear them a little bit. But to get a really sharp scraper that will cut softwoods like pine, you need to hone them. So let me just start out doing that. I'm going to rejuvenate this scraper here. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with a file. This is just a file that's sold for chainsaw sharpening, the drags on a chainsaw chain. It's got safe sides, and it's a really short file. The shorter the file, the finer the cut, even within the same grade. So a mill bastard cut long file is coarser than a mill bastard cut shorter file. So a short file in a fine grade is what you want for this. And then I'm just going to take it, I put it down up against a stop, and pull the scraper across right like that. And the goal here, if this scraper blade has ever been sharpened for, is to file it past the rounded off corners and get back to a square edge. All right, having done that, I can feel I've got rough burrs left from this file on both sides, and that's a good sign at this stage. It means I've gone far enough. So I can get rid of the file. Oh, just a reminder, when you're using a file, you have to put a tremendous amount of pressure down into the file for it to cut. If you're just kind of dragging it across here, it's not really doing anything. You've got to put a lot of pressure down, and then it'll really cut. All right, so then I want to work up my grits. I've got a fairly coarse diamond stone here. I'm just going to put a little water on it, and holding my file, what is this thing called? A scraper. Just going to rub it back and forth like that. Diamonds are good for these things because they don't wear. But I only have the really coarse one, so this is a Japanese water stone, and it works just fine. I'm going to rub it across. Notice how I'm going diagonally to the stone, and that way I'm not rubbing a groove in it like I would if I ran it that way. So just try and keep it mostly square there. Rub it back and forth. That's probably good enough. And then I'm going to go up to my 6,000 grit. That was probably a 8 or a 1200 that I was at a minute ago. And I'm going to rub on that. All right, now I need to get rid of that burr that I've got. If we go over here to the seat, you can see what it does. It's not going to cut very well at all. You can see it's leaving tear marks in the pine and making these little fluffy, no good shavings. So, and the other disadvantage of that is that that burr won't last very long at all. So in a pinch, you could use it, but it's not much good. So I'm just going to work back and forth on both sides. The less pressure you put down onto the stone, the better that burr's going to come off, is my thought, because if you put a lot of pressure down, you're going to force the burr over, whereas if you put just a little bit of pressure down, hopefully you're just going to cut the burr off and it'll go away a whole lot easier. And I think that holds true with most edges. I'm going to work both sides, then work the edge, both sides, work the end here, and just keep doing that until I think that burr's gone. Now, when you roll the burr, that is the point of no return. If you have rolled it and you haven't sharpened this edge well enough, you will have to go back to the file. And this would be a good point to say that I would say 9/10 of the sharpening problems that people have sharpening scrapers are in this stage. They don't get the scraper sharp before they roll the burr. Once you've rolled the burr, rolling the burr is really easy. If you've got a hard piece of metal, you can do it without really much thought or time. But in order for that to work, you have to have a sharp edge. So getting rid of this burr, this sharpening burr, and getting a really sharp edge are imperative. So you can see I'm really working this thing. I think I probably got it. Now we want to have a way of testing this thing before we roll the burr. And the best thing to do is to go over to our piece of soft wood, because soft wood is harder to cut than hardwood. Softwood crumbles in front of an edge, whereas hardwood will cut even if the edge is slightly dull. I want to check and see if this thing is taking chips, which it is what it's doing. You can see it's taking a nice little chip. Perfectly square edge is cutting. And that's a good sign that this thing is ready to roll. I can roll the burr on it and I will have a sharp edge. So test it before you roll the burr. All right. I've got a dressed edge here. The burr's gone. The sharpening burr's gone, and the edge is square. Now, let me talk about burnishers for a minute. The only thing you need in a burnisher is something that is harder than the steel that you're cutting. Well, cutting, you're not cutting the scraper. The harder than the steel of the scraper. And it needs to be really smooth. You don't want to have scratch marks in it because they'll act like the teeth in a file and cut your nicely prepared edge over here. So this is just a safe file that has, what by safe, it means it doesn't have teeth on the edge here. The edge is slightly convex. I've actually buffed this edge. And it makes a great burnisher. Files are extremely hard. And I had it laying around, so it works great. For a long time, I used a screwdriver, which I had read somewhere was the perfect thing, and I already had it, so I used it. It turns out that at least the screwdriver I was using was hardened from about the tip up to about here, and the shank was all soft. And so once I wore through the hard chrome plating on the outside of the shank, it was worthless as a burnisher. So I would not use screwdrivers. The backs of chisels work okay, but it's nice to have a rounded edge. So you can buy commercial burnishers or use a file. This chainsaw file here might work pretty well. It's got a safe edge on it, and if you buff that and made sure there were no teeth in the way, you could probably use that. I know people who use the shank of a router bit that's really hard, but whatever you use, this part everybody is trying to sell you jigs to do this. And it is so easy to do, and as long as you've got a sharp edge, it doesn't take any hardly any skill, and you have perfect results. So I don't understand the whole fad for all these jigs. So at any rate, what you want to do is this part, which supposedly flattens hardens the surface. Now, I don't know if it's doing that or not, but everybody tells you to do it, so I do it. One thing you can do is set it back here and put your burnisher flat, or I'm sorry, diagonally, so it's on the scraper here and it's on the flat bench top here. And so you're slightly beveling just barely beveling this edge, pushing metal that way. Now, when you do this, you want to skew the burnisher that way. You don't want to skew it this way, or you'll be kind of puckering metal up in front of it. You want to draw the metal out towards the edge. You want to think about this metal like as if it was clay, and you're kind of moving it a little bit. Then you want to hold your burnisher almost plumb, but not quite. So it's just tilted just slightly this way, not a whole lot, a couple 3 degrees, and you want to skew it towards so it's facing up. So you're pushing metal up, and then you just draw it across. Very little pressure, just with your couple of fingers putting pressure in there. I've got a little bit of a burr now. Let's see what that does over here in the chair. The more time passes you take and the more pressure you put, the thicker the shaving you're going to get. But you can see that's already doing a pretty good job. I might want a little bit thicker shaving than that, so I might go back and take another pass or two. But I'll go ahead and burnish the back side, and you're ready to go. So you can see that the burnishing is really easy and doesn't need to be precise. The angle of that I'm rolling that burr at is not critical. If I'm at 3 degrees or 2 degrees or 1 degree or 5 degrees, the wood doesn't know. So don't worry about that. So let's say you've used this thing a number of times and it's starting to get dull. One thing that happens when you get dull is you actually have to lower the scraper further for it to start cutting. The burr gets rolled further around the curve there. So how would I touch this up? Well, before I went back to the file, one thing I could do is to just refresh that burr. So it's basically the exact same thing we did before in creating the burr. I'm going to roll it back that way, flop it back that way, and then push it back the other way. You can do this at least once, possibly twice, and probably not 3 times. But that will totally refresh your edge. Well, maybe not totally refresh your edge, but it will refresh it and get it to cut again. And then once eventually you do that and you work hard on the metal and the edge, the burr totally falls off in places. And then you have to go back to the file back past this rounded over edge you now have, and then you can start over again. Let me talk about using these things for a minute, because this is another place where you really can go wrong and it won't cut. So you can see that used properly, this scraper is leaving nice thick shavings. Now let's say I hold it like this. I'm not getting anything but dust. So it really is critical that you use this scraper as a edge tool rather than a scraper. The scraper word is actually a misnomer. It's not a scraping tool, it cuts. You've got an edge that you've burnished forward. So the edge, you've got this hook that's pointed forward, and you're pulling a chip that is then caught in between the negative angle between the acute angle between the scraper and the seat, and the chip is being forced back down into the seat, and that's why the scraper doesn't tear. So it's actually cutting a chip, and the scraper is like a self-jigging tool. It's like a chip breaker on a plane, keeping the chip down, and so it doesn't pull out ahead of the edge. So If that makes any sense, let me go on. How do you use the thing? You start with the scraper too vertical. You've pulled it back too far. It's almost square to the seat, and you push, and it won't cut because you have the edge isn't engaging. And then as you're pushing it forward, you're going to slightly adjust the angle, letting it drop forward just a tad until right there it starts to cut. Now that's going to be the hardest place to push it, but that's the place where you're taking a shaving. If you drop it down any further, the shaving gets increasingly smaller until down here you're just ruining your edge and not doing yourself any good. So I'm holding it with my thumbs in the middle, like that. How do I hold this? With my thumbs in the middle like that, my fingers out on the corners, and all my fingers are down close to the edge. I don't want to be holding it up here, I want to be holding it down low. And then you can just push it along right like that. Usually skewing it is the best thing to do. But really just remembering to keep it upright, right at the point where the edge engages the work is the angle between the scraper and the seat that you want to be cutting at. So those are my few pearls of wisdom on scraper use and sharpening, and I hope you enjoyed them. Thanks for watching.
If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking with hand tools, visit my website at woodandshop.com, where you'll find free video tutorials, buying guides, workshop tours, and reviews. Make sure you subscribe to receive my regular blog posts and YouTube videos, and don't forget to check out my 10 steps for getting started. Enjoy!